You can bet on every point. You can bet point by point. So if you're watching a Dodger game, if you were watching the World Series, you can bet on every single pitch, whether it will be a ball or strike. This is purely for addicts, okay? This is not for the responsible gamer who's going to put some money on the game and go cheer. Like, if you're betting on every pitch in the game while you're watching it, you have a problem.
Welcome to the Unspeakable Podcast. I'm your host, Meghan Daum. If I were to ask you what form of addiction is poised to become the next epidemic for young people, especially young men, would you be surprised to hear that it has to do with sports? According to my guest, Alex Grodd, sports betting, which became legal in the US in 2018 and migrated almost entirely to smartphone apps, has become an enormous and unprecedentedly predatory industry. Alex is the host of the Disagreement, a podcast that takes a complicated subject, for instance, AI and education or nuclear energy, and brings together two smart people with opposing views to bring out the best in their arguments, and more importantly, see the best in their opponents' arguments. He recently devoted an entire episode to sports betting and the question of whether it has become as addictive and destructive as online pornography. It actually drops this week. You can listen to it this week. This is a question that touches on many of the fundamental issues that we talk about on this podcast, as well as things we've never talked about. And it's a great conversation. And I'm excited to bring it to you. So here's Alex Grodd. Alex Grodd, welcome to The Unspeakable.
It is phenomenal to be here. I'm very fired up for this conversation.
All right. Well, let's just have it. So let's get right into it. So we have a fentanyl epidemic. We have young men addicted to online pornography to the point that they're not even interested in actual sex, at least according to reports.
Right.
Are you saying that we now have to worry about sports? Should we ban sports?
Yes.
How far is this going to go?
Sports on many different levels. I think the actual way that young boys and young men engage with sports fandom, the way they think about sports is fundamentally shifting before our eyes. And then sort of very related is this incredibly destructive and, to me, it was relatively shocking shift from the way sports betting existed back when I was in my 20s, where you had some offshore account in Azerbaijan and there was some third-rate criminal syndicate that you'd put your money into and you didn't know if you'd ever get it back, to now this massive industry, $16 billion industry with thousands of employees who are incredibly focused on getting young people addicted to gambling. And so it's just been a shift. People don't realize what a profound and destructive shift has taken place over the past 6 years.
Okay. So let's back up for a minute. So I mentioned in my introduction, you are the host of a podcast called The Disagreement. And I want to know sort of how this issue came to your attention. Presumably it was through the podcast. But before we get to that, can you just sort of tell us a little bit about who you are? Where did you grow up? What was your relationship to sports and sports?
Sure. Yeah.
Gambling?
So I grew up in Western Mass, suburban Western Mass. I was a tennis player. I was like a good high school tennis player. I was always like bro adjacent. Sports were like, I was never that into sports and following sports, but like my social group, it was central to what we did in high school and in college. So I always knew enough to play along and had enough sort of bro in me to like participate in sports fandom and sports viewing and some sports gambling back then as part of like a social culture.
And what was the era?
So I grew up, I graduated high school in 99. I went to college in 2004. We were here in Boston. So it was when the Red Sox won their first World Series. And The Patriots won their first Super Bowl. So I have very vivid memories of just the profound joy and camaraderie and like just the unique experiences of rooting for a team that you cared about, having them do well, being drunk with your friends, running around in the streets. I didn't flip any cars, but there were cars being flipped all around us when the Red Sox won their first World Series. So, I am familiar with that. And what's been so interesting to me about this shift over the past 6 years is a lot of that is dying. There are wide swaths of young boys today who really, they are fans of the teams they bet on. It is impossible. I spoke as part of my research for this to, one 32-year-old man who is addicted to gambling, and he is an incredible Ohio State fan. Went to Ohio State. Ohio State football has been his life. He can't watch a game without betting on it. And there's lots of people. So anyway, that old school concept of fandom in 2004 is it's dissipating for large swaths of young men.
Wow. And is that because people just don't go out of their houses anymore? Or is it more expensive to go to the games? I'm sure it's much more expensive than it used to be.
No, I think it's the way that betting has permeated the culture of sports. And I think to just back up for 1 second, most people will not know this, but in 2018, there was a Supreme Court ruling that overturned a ban on sports betting. There was a federal ban on sports betting. It overturned it, put it back to the states. So over the past 6 years, 38 states have legalized sports betting. So we're in the earliest stages, the first inning, if you will, second inning of what is a profound cultural shift. And so when I was preparing for our episode, for our disagreement on sports betting, there were two things that struck me. The first was that we spent a year finding someone to defend the industry. Okay. Normally, on almost every other episode that we've done, we have dozens of people who are interested, experts who want to sort of make their case on both sides of the issue. Some are harder than others, but we've never, ever had an issue where there was not a single person who was willing to publicly defend this industry.
Wow.
So that was
okay.
So
it was sort of like child trafficking, pro or con.
Right, exactly. There's no, and that's the craziest part of this. And I'll come back to the way it shifted the culture. But the craziest part of this for me is we've done 20 episodes. We've done Israel. We've done gender affirming care. We've done criminal justice reform. We've done sleep training, which was maybe our most controversial topic in many ways. Immigration, ADHD, you name it. All of those topics. I'm a big both sideser by nature. I really want to engage with the entire spectrum of an issue. I want to find the nuggets of truth wherever they exist and kind of do my own synthesis. This was the first issue where I was like, man, this is not a both. Actually, what you do with the predatory industry is interesting because there's a legalization side and there's aggressive regulation, legalized aggressive regulation, and a prohibition. I think that's a super interesting conversation. But there isn't anyone to defend this industry because I will break it down for you. It is evil. It's vile. And all of this is to say that, to come back to my original point, young people today are betting on sports because of the legalization, because of the shift to mobile, because it's in their phone. I mean, FanDuel and DraftKings are in, if you have a son and they're in high school, and it's illegal, they likely have them on their phone. If they're in college, 100% doing this. So instead of the old school where you rooted for the teams you care about, now betting has so infiltrated sports culture that you now bet on the team. You cheer for the team that you bet on, where you have action. You cheer for action. So fandom, as we know it, is shifting in really serious ways. Anyway,
okay.
Sorry for all that. But
so walk me through, say, a day in the life of somebody who is really caught up in this. Okay,
so I interviewed for this piece. I interviewed three people that were either in recovery or currently addicted to gambling. So they were one man in his 20s and two in their early 30s. And every story was incredibly similar, which is they started, betting in the offshore markets before it was legalized. One of them became addicted back then and now has transferred it to the current mobile sites and the FanDuel DraftKings mobile experience. But it's just tragic story. Like, it's tragic stories. Two of them are married. One of them was betting 3x his income one year. He lost $25,000. All three of them had 2 or 3 separate accounts that their spouses did not know about. All three had opened new loans and credit accounts. They were all in debt. One person was just paying off, like, everything he earned was going to pay off his debts. So, like, the nature of this addiction that people don't understand, it's just different than alcohol and drugs and opioids, in that, like, all of those are deeply devastating, but it usually takes some time, right? And with alcohol, you don't kill yourself over a weekend, you kill yourself over a period of decades. One bad weekend, two of these guys used to bet together, and they had this moment 7 years ago that they called their, like, betting 9/11, where they bet together on the same stuff, and they each lost $25,000 in a day. So
okay.
It's crazy.
Okay. Explain. So you're talking about, are these two companies or apps? DraftKings is one.
Yes.
And what's the other one? And, like, these
FanDuel.
are FanDuel. Okay.
FanDuel.
We don't want to give these people publicity, but these are apps, and these are American companies?
Correct, with thousands of employees. And Nate Silver was like, these two companies are employing aerospace engineers to prey on young people. That's what they do. So let me break down how it works on the mobile side. So there's a couple key things. In the pre-2018 court ruling era, when you would bet, you either did it with some mobbed up sort of syndicate here in the United States, it was illegal, or you did it with an offshore account. What you could bet on, these were not big companies with, like, AI engineers, right? These were, like, again, sort of third-rate criminal syndicates. So, you could bet on who was going to win the game, right? And there was an over-under. You could bet on a few other things. There was a very sort of chocolate versus vanilla menu that you had, right? Well, now one very important shift in the mobile betting is that at any given time, if I downloaded the app just for research purposes, there's 100 different sources of action at any given time that you can bet on. And it's not just betting, like, this is like the Ben and Jerry's, like, if the old school you could do vanilla chocolate, this is like the Ben and Jerry's with that little, like, tube in the middle that's a different color, and all the fudge crackers and gooey marshmallows. It's right now you can bet on table tennis in the Czech Republic, right? So that's what a healthy, responsible gamer at 11 a.m. is betting on table tennis in the Czech Republic, right? Not only that, but this is crazy. You can bet on every point. You can bet point by point. So if you're watching a Dodger game, if you were watching the World Series, you can bet on every single pitch, whether it will be a ball or strike. This is purely for addicts, okay? This is not for the responsible gamer who's going to put some money on the game and go cheer. Like, if you're betting on every pitch in the game while you're watching it, you have a problem. So it's shifted it in that way. That's one way. It's just the nature of the algorithmic action. And they push it to you. They say, hey, the women's tennis has a tournament in Beijing. Let's bet point by point. It's insane. People wake up in the middle of the night. It's like Instagram for financial ruin, basically.
And they show you the stats. There has to be some, like, level of skill and gamesmanship here, right? Like, are people tracking stats and they're making educated bets, or is this just, like, throwing stuff to the wall?
Here's the reality. there's two types of sports bettors, and it's like very, very clear. There are professional sports bettors. Nate Silver spent much of the past few years, and he writes about it in his book, as a professional sports bettor.
Okay, and explain who Nate Silver is, just in case anyone doesn't know. He's famous for his statistics and polling and predictions.
Exactly, and he's also a part-time professional bettor. He's a poker player, but he also does sports betting. I also interviewed for this a professional sports bettor. What every sports bettor has in common that wins, that makes money and does it consistently, is two things. One, they have some edge, okay? They have some niche knowledge that no one else has, and they are exploiting it to the fullest of their abilities. Two, they have like 10,000 lines of code running all times. Professional sports bettors are not just reading the paper and making bets. This is a like massive full-time thing. You have Nate is a model guy, right? Like he builds complex models based on lots of data. That's how he gets an edge. And even that, I heard him interviewed, like he didn't do well last year. Like with all of that, he still didn't do well. So then everyone else is going to lose. Okay. Here's why. No matter how good you think you are, if you're not running 10,000 lines of code, it's just, there's two reasons. One, there are all sorts of bets that people engage in now that they push on people as part of this new thing called parlays and things like that are really set up for you to fail. Like
what is a parlay? What does that mean?
A parlay is when you take one bet and you combine it with another bet, and that could be in the same game or it could be separate. So if I was going to bet on a Celtics game, and so if I bet that Jason Tatum would make 7 or more 3-point shots, then I could also bet that the Celtics are going to win and cover the spread. And I could also bet that Jaylen Brown, his free throw percentage would be, he would take more than 8 free throws. Okay. And you can stack it all the way up to these 13, 14 layers. But what they do is instead of just giving you taking the odds of each of those things and giving you a fair payout, like a fair multiple, they don't disclose how they do it. And so it ends up being what you actually get paid on these parlays is bogus. Like it's not, and people, and this is what they push. The marketing for parlays, that's the number one thing these people market because, it's almost impossible to win.
The house will win always.
Yeah, the house always wins. I think the other reason is if you are doing well, they shut you down. People don't get this, but if you are doing well, let's say you're an individual and you're doing well and you're making some money and you're, reading your blogs, they just shut you down and you can't bet anymore. And so much of what Nate Silver and the professional bettors do is the cat and mouse of opening new accounts, throwing them off their tail, going and making bets in person, they pay all sorts of different people to put money down. So if you're really going to do well, you have to be prepared to treat it like a full-time job and play that cat and mouse game. The vast majority of people, even the ones that are doing their research, at some point they end up losing, and they end up losing big.
Okay, wait. And I want to get back to your 3 examples of people who got addicted to this. But yes, first of all, what do you mean they shut you down? Like, how could they, like this person is doing too, we're deleting your account? How do they get away with that?
They say, we will not accept, here's your money, we're done.
Why?
We will not accept any more bets from you.
On what grounds?
Because the whole thing is rigged.
How do they put it? But they don't frame it that way. What do they say? Like
they say they make your limit like $10. They're like, we have algorithmically changed your betting limit on this app. You can now bet $10 or $50 per bet. I mean, they shut you down if you're doing well.
Okay. All right.
That's how they all operate. And it's the way Vegas, has operated forever. If you're counting cards or you're doing well in blackjack, they will escort you out of the casino. It's the same. I mean, it's the same model, the same ethos, the same culture, the same lobbyists.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about these guys, and presumably these are all mostly men get caught up in this. So with your examples, like who are they? How old are they? What were their life circumstances? How much money was at stake? What was going on for them?
Well, I'll start with the Ohio State fan. And he's because all three of these actually have a different outcome. So the Ohio State fan is, 36, married with 2 kids. This has been the number one source of stress and strain in his marriage. He, like I said, when you're an addict, I mean, people need to understand that this is addictive. It's in the DSM-5 with heroin in terms of its addictive, call it sport.
Gambling.
Like
Sports gambling specifically, or gambling?
Gambling is in the DSM-5. Sports gambling on your phone, and I haven't even gotten to the good parts on how predatory it is, but we'll come back to that, is the most potent form of gambling because it's literally, you can do it in your sleep. I mean, people sit in their bed and bet on check table tennis point by point. So it's crazier than really anything we've seen before. So he, I think here, let's start here. I think understanding why it is so appealing, like what is appealing about the sports betting, is really important to understanding the psychology of addiction. So for him, and I think like a lot of young men, and I've experienced this, and I gamble quarterly, and have or a little more, but like the rush of action, like it's like when you combine like bro camaraderie with a drinking and cheering for a team that you care about, that you have money on, and winning, or even better, like not just winning, but chasing bets in game, doing that pitch by pitch and winning more and more and more. Like, honestly, the vast majority of people just like compare it to an orgasm, but like an orgasm, like on Molly or like beyond, it's truly erotic in a way that it's hard to understand if you haven't had that experience of the social and the drinking and your team and the wins and the money. And it's just, there is a feeling that is hard to describe that I've never experienced. I've experienced like very low levels. And so, I think that is addictive. And then when you combine that for this guy with the fact that sports was central to all of his social interactions, right? Like, men are very bad. We don't have anything to talk about. We don't want to talk about things. Our relationships are quite shallow relative to women. And so sports just gives us a way to interact and be with one another and commune. And so once you get that hit, you get that erotic buzz, your whole life is so integrated with sports, from what you're watching ESPN and you're checking the games on your phone. Then the idea that it's like, it's like a nice meal and you can have some wine to complement the flavors, right? Mm-hmm. And so he just started doing it. And, he did it in the black market economy, which was quite dangerous because you can bet on credit. You don't have to put money down. And so there's no question there are issues with pre-2018.
Okay.
Yeah.
And again, this is something that is so new to me. Before 2018, all sports betting was illegal except
Vegas.
for like,
you could go to Vegas
and OTB kind of, you could do off-track betting, or you could go to the racetrack, I guess.
Exactly.
Yes.
You could not legally play sports bets in Massachusetts, where I'm from. You could go to Vegas, and we'll come back to Vegas because I think there's an important metaphor, or you could do what is mostly these black market offshore accounts. Like,
okay.
I had a friend who had an app in Uzbekistan, and we would throw money there, and we never knew if it was coming back or not. But that was sort of what you did. This particular person had a mob-based black market bookie who gave him up to $10,000 of credit. So he didn't have to put any money down. So he could just, call the guy up and be like, hey, I'm going to play around with 10 grand and see what happens. So that was quite devastating. That's when he started the secret. I mean, anyone that even has a mild gambling addiction has, secret bank accounts, secret loans that they are paying off. This is like just total table stakes for a gambling addiction. And then at some point, there is a spouse, there is a wife that finds out, and it usually leads to just total devastation of the marriage or divorce. In his case, didn't lead to divorce, but it is a source of like profound stress for the two of them, because he is still betting and he can't stop, and he is still, he watches Ohio State every week and he needs to have action. He can't enjoy like his favorite team in the world without the action. And so he's still doing it, and he's still doing the dance. And, the thing that was interesting that he said, he described the mental load of navigating all of these lies, like just pure lies and manipulation. And so it's funny because, there's the mental load discourse amongst women and mothers and wives, and there is a mental load discourse amongst gambling addicts that is profound, right? Of their, however you want to look at the ethics of it, but it is profound.
And will they talk about the need for money, really? Or is this just beyond money? Like they want the rush and the money is just kind of like a side thing?
So we had this guy, Harry Levant, on our show as the sort of, to take on the gambling industry. And he is a gambling addict in recovery. He lost $2 million. He got disbarred because he stole money from he was a lawyer. He was like a high-end lawyer. He stole money from his clients. He makes the point, he makes it on our podcast and he made it with me. It's not about the money. It's about the feeling. It's about the rush. It's about the buzz. I mean, obviously money's great, and no one, like, the money is what creates the rush or the buzz, but it's just about the way it makes you feel. And then again, when you're sort of wedding it with the thing you love, like sports and sports viewing and social camaraderie, he bets every Sunday. He bets with 4 guys and they go watch the games together. Like that's the thing he loves the most in life. And so to take it away from him, what he said that was so hard, because he wants to quit. I mean, he 100%, thinks of himself as an addict and wants to quit. There's nothing good, he talked about just how much time it takes to read up on all the sports and try to do it. And he's not spending time with his kids, but he can't give it up because sports are everywhere. Like it's like, if you're quitting alcohol at a certain point, you remove it from your house and you're not going to go to bars and you remove yourself. But like, if you're a 36-year-old dude where it's been so central to your life, your whole, like, it's everywhere. You can't go anywhere without that trigger. So it was tragic.
So we should say on the episode of the Disagreement where you talk about this, you've got your 2 guests are a guy who's a former addict who is now kind of a gambler. He's kind of a sports betting therapist.
And activist.
Activist.
He's been part of some recent legislation we can talk about. Yes, exactly.
Okay. And then you have another guy. You finally did manage to find somebody who would defend the industry. So who is this?
This was Ben Fox. Now, I say that with a caveat because hopefully you listen to the episode. It's really excellent. And like it goes into a lot of what we're talking about. But Ben is a very moderate defender of the industry. I think he is someone who was at ESPN as a journalist and helped ESPN sort of spin up its sports betting infrastructure. He has his own sports betting Substack where people pay him for picks and things like that. So he's part of the industry. But what was interesting about this was he really agreed with a lot of what Harry was saying. He did not there's 2 fundamental points about the industry that I think are so important to hit home. And he did not in any way fundamentally disagree with these points. I think he might have, he had some questions or he might not use the same language, but I think the sports betting industry right now is, and this is, there's some data that I'll share with you, is their entire business model is based on addiction. Okay. That needs to be repeated. FanDuel, DraftKings, MGM, Caesars, ESPN Bet, their business model is 100%, not 100%. Their business model is primarily based on addiction. And what I mean by that is when you look at their revenue, okay, they're not making their money based on me putting in my like quarterly bet on Sergio Garcia for $50, right? They're not even making their money by someone that's betting weekly a couple $100 on whatever the over under or whatever the game. They are making their money based on the guy that I just told you about and the hundreds of thousands of people that are addicted. And here is a stat that I will pull up, and it's very hard to get at this data because they have all the data, right? Like they know how the money is flowing and how it comes in. But New Jersey did release some data, and this is from, I think, a year ago. 5% of bettors are responsible for 70% of the revenue in New Jersey. Okay. So let me say that again. 5% of bettors are responsible for 70% of the revenue. So point one is this is an industry that is totally driven, fueled, and based on addicts. And as a result, it is an industry where their entire product and user experience teams and everything they're doing is trying to cultivate addiction. That is just true. And let me give you an example of what they do in this mobile app. Okay. There was a great New York Times article we can link to. It's excellent, in partnership with The Athletic from, I think, a few weeks ago. It told the story of a veteran who was making $100K a year, who was addicted to sports betting. I think it was FanDuel, lost $50,000 over the course of like 9 months. He then went into therapy. He was 4 months sober, and the app they have these algorithmic AI hosts or VIPs, which are based on the old school human VIPs in Vegas, which were like, attractive women who would come up to you and try to get you to gamble. These algorithmic hosts started giving him free money to come back and bet. I mean, this is the most vile thing you could possibly do to a human being who's already shredded his life. And then he did. They gave him $7,000 ultimately in free bets.
But what does that mean?
Back.
Like they put it in his account?
Yes.
It's connected to an account and they just put it in there.
Hey, they know. I mean, there's 92 data points that their AI system know. They know like when you get your paycheck, when you're with your friends, when you're drinking. I mean, this is like Nate Silver said, these are like aerospace engineers whose only goal is to prey upon either addicts or would-be addicts. And so I think like, it's just so I don't know what there is to debate on this point when you have this sort of predatory activity. And it's the same with my buddies. The 3 people I interviewed, they all had the algorithms when they were trying to take a break or they were trying to quit, come back. And if someone gives you $1,000 to come back and make bets, like, and you're an addict, like it's like there's no equivalent. And this is a point Harry makes. There's no equivalent. Alcohol is quite regulated. Like if you went to a bar and ordered a club soda and said, hey, I'm trying to, thanks, but I'm trying to quit. And they were like, well, let me give you 12 free margaritas and a case of Bud Light to go home with. Like that would be morally abominable.
Right.
And
well, or it would be like if they just showed up and put a 6-pack in your refrigerator.
Yes, exactly. That's even better. Exactly. Okay. And yet, like this is all in plain sight. And this is like I'd love to talk at some point about the leagues, the owners, the teams, the press, the total integration into the sports industrial complex. Everyone is in bed with this truly predatory behavior. This is why I wanted to come on, because I'm clearly like, what
okay,
the fuck?
well, let's talk about that. What is the role of the teams and the leagues in the sports industry?
So what's funny is, right, if you go back a decade or two, like the teams wanted nothing to do with sports betting because it was bad for their brand. It was stigmatized, right? The Super Bowl would not allow Las Vegas to air a commercial just to come to the city. Okay. This is what the league banned that, a decade to 15 years ago. I mean, now every single league has deep multi-billion-dollar partnerships with DraftKings, with FanDuel. I mean, if you are a sports fan, it is everywhere. There's a totalitarian influence of these betting sites on the experience. So that, again, the leagues sell their data to DraftKings so they can use it to come up with their odds and create their products. They partner with them in their stadiums. There's advertising everywhere to kids. I mean, we can talk about the kids part. I have some anecdotes. It has been reported that in a number of AAs, there's no like hard data, like the average age of Gamblers Anonymous over the past few years has gone down like 20 to 25 years. It used to be like old dudes with blackjack problems. Now it's like middle school kids. It is high school kids. Like I saw a bunch of high school kids after school on their phone. They were all sports betting. So, I mean, it's illegal, but it's all you need is your parents' credit card. Anyway, so you have the teams, the owners, the players. LeBron just did a massive endorsement deal with DraftKings. Okay.
Wow.
Kevin Hart is the DraftKings spokesperson. You have people like Bill Simmons who plugs the parlays, which are, just the worst possible way to try to win money or the fastest way to lose money. They have all sorts of integration. The Ringer has all sorts of integration. And I love Bill Simmons. He's like I listen to him twice a week for 12 years, but it's not just the Dave Portnoys. It's not just the people that you would expect. It is the sort of highbrow, like sports media establishment. The fact that Adam Silver, who is the commissioner of the NBA, okay, like he is the progressive darling of the sports world, right? He spent much of the pandemic helping to put social justice terms on people's jerseys, which, clearly was very helpful to,
yes,
urban poverty.
We've talked about this. I had Ethan Strauss on the podcast. Yeah, we talked a lot about this. Yes.
Ethan, there's two journalists that are talking about this. Ethan is one of them. He had an excellent podcast about this. And then Jamel Hill also has been talking about this, but they're both independent and no longer within the establishment. But so Adam Silver is this progressive darling who is virtue signaling everywhere. And honestly, always like a role model for someone like me. Like he seems like a great guy, and I'm sure he is like a deeply ethical person. And yet he is to say that the NBA is in bed with these folks. I mean, they're spooning, and they're not even spooning. They're like, their legs are weaved, like creating a weave.
See how far you can take this this metaphor. Okay.
I'll stop there.
The holiday giving season is upon us. Have you ever wondered where your donation could have the most impact? In 2007, a group of donors had that exact question. But when they sought out information from charities to help them answer it, they just got cute pictures or unhelpful stories. Their experience led them to create GiveWell, an organization that would provide rigorous, transparent research about the best giving opportunities they found. GiveWell has now spent over 17 years researching charitable organizations and only directs funding to a few of the highest impact opportunities they've found. Over 100,000 donors have used GiveWell to donate more than $2 billion. Thorough evidence suggests that these donations will save over 200,000 lives and improve the lives of millions more. GiveWell wants as many donors as possible to make informed decisions about high impact giving. You can find all of their research and recommendations on their website for free. And you can make tax-deductible donations to their recommended funds or charities, and GiveWell does not take a cut. If you've never used GiveWell to donate, you can have your donation matched up to $100 before the end of the year or as long as matching funds last. To claim your match, go to givewell.org and pick podcast and enter the Unspeakable podcast at checkout. Make sure they know that you heard about GiveWell from the Unspeakable podcast to get your donation matched. Again, that's givewell.org to donate or to find out more.
The point is that, like, unsurprisingly, this the predation affects low-income communities of color disproportionately, right? So, he's really excellent at putting terms on jerseys, and meanwhile is like actively bringing new, and this is the important point, new young people into a world that will cause them financial ruin for some percentage. I mean, it's very clear that for every 100 new people that were not sports betting in 2017, but are now because of the regulation, the advertising, the advertisements, the whole industrial complex, some percentage of them, whether it's 5%, 10%, are going to destroy their lives. And Adam Silver, is going to have blood on his hands. He does have blood on his hands. And I love you, Adam. I love the NBA. This is not a shaming thing, but
I doubt he listens to this podcast, so don't worry.
We'll try to get him.
So in 2018, when this was all made legal, what was the rationale? Was it just expand the business? What was their thinking? And was there any sort of, words of caution at that time? This is not going to lead anywhere good.
Well, I think there's a few things. One, in 2018, they did not in any way envision the nature of the mobile product that has been built. So the idea of being able to, it's called chasing. If you're losing your bet in a particular game, you chase by betting in game on every pitch, on every throw. The idea that you can bet on the Celtics with 70 seconds left on the game when they're up by 30, you can bet as to what the ultimate over under of the score is going to be. Are they going to win by 34 or 29? They did not envision any of this. And I think it is and this is the nature of capitalism, the nature of product development. But there's two, if you listen to the gaming industry, and they have a great sort of villain that when this becomes the Netflix special, Dope Sick, it will be played by Greg Kinnear, this guy, Bill Miller, who's just and Bill, I would love to talk to you, would love to have you on the show, or anyone from your organization, your powerful lobby. There are two justifications that the Gaming Association gives, and I think that influence this court case. One is just a libertarian argument, which I am sympathetic to, right? Adults should be able to do things that are, that they can choose whether or not, what to do. So there is this libertarian argument. I think there's this other argument to it, which is, there's tax revenue. So there's the black market and there's tax revenue. So there is and was, prior to 2018, a massive multi-billion-dollar black market in gambling. So people were gambling. And I think this is a really important point. People cite it, I think in our podcast, Ben Falk said it was $100 billion plus industry, so there is this, there was this black market. So one argument is if you legalize it, you will get rid of the black market. And then you can regulate and you can earn tax revenue, right? The tax revenue argument is a big argument. And so that's what the American Gaming Association, Bill Miller, that's what they're saying, because there's still 12 states that have not legalized it. So there's California, there's Texas, those are the big two. And that's essentially their talking points are, right? Libertarian, freedom, and then, eliminate the black market and get tax revenue. So I think it's worth looking at all of those, right? And breaking those down. I think the question about libertarianism, I think that's a philosophical question we could get into, but there's a difference between being able to make bets and do it without calling up Azerbaijan and without engaging with a mobbed up bookie, and having a predatory AI host offer you free money when you're trying to quit, right? There's a difference between being able to bet on the sports you want versus bet on every pitch of every game in China at any moment. And so I think that's where Harry, our guest, came in. It's let's regulate this. Let's have a common sense approach to adults, putting money on games.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we can come back to that. The other two arguments is like the black market. Well, we're 6 years into regulation and the black market is still thriving because it just provides a different product experience. Again, you can bet on credit. You can bet if you get turned off by some of these apps. So the black market is still thriving. It's done nothing.
Okay. So this is like the money store. This is like the lending tree of betting.
Exactly.
Okay.
So
okay.
It's reduced the black market to some extent, but it's still alive and well. And then the tax revenue piece is really interesting because that's their big other argument. And that's their core argument when they go to these states. And there's 2 points. One Harry makes that I think is great. We should not call it revenue. We should call it losses by people in your community, like people in your community losing money that they could otherwise use to feed their family or invest in their college educations. It's not revenue. It is an inherently adversarial industry. The only way they make money is when people lose. And so it's very unique. The other piece of it is that it's not creating that much tax revenue. I think people really need to sit with this because, again, all these states, like the point that it's not really revenue. It's like people in your community are losing money. And then there's all the social services you have to pay for. Like it ends up being a bum deal, even if it was creating a lot of revenue. But for 38 states this quarter, there was $500 million in revenue from sports betting. Okay. 500 million across 38 states. That's it's a drop in the bucket. So it's not moving the needle in any meaningful way on any budget priorities. And yet it is leading to devastating outcomes. And that's, right. And that's why for me, we can talk about this at some point. I don't know whether I am pro-regulation or pro-prohibition. I think there is a real case to be made for going back to the black market and taking the offshore, syndicates and just minimizing harm via prohibition. But that's a different thing.
Okay. All right. Well, let's shift slightly and get into the obvious analogy, which is online pornography. So, I mean, this is a topic that's familiar to most people at this point. We know that when the apps came around and Pornhub was a huge game changer, this is the story we've heard. It used to be that you would look through Playboy and, there was a what magic to that experience.
Just like little tufts of pubic hair that
God forbid. What is that? of what do you speak? I don't right. know what that is. So, right. And so I think most people are familiar with the basic outline of what happened with online pornography and, the extent of the addiction there and the downstream effects of that. So how do you kind of think about that parallel? What has your process been around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of parallels because there's the addictive element. I think the interesting parallel is the ratcheting that you see. So, in pornography, and I'm just speaking, not from personal experience. I am speaking as a student of it. There is a way in which you start with whatever, and the internet has sort of distorted this and sped up the ratcheting in weird ways. But for someone like me in the, coming of age in the late 80s, 90s, yes, you had this natural scaffolding from Playboy to Penthouse to Hustler to my random uncle's VHS set. And then you work your way up. But as you're working your way up, you don't go backwards, right? There's a ratcheting in the sense that you need more and more to get off. And it's in the internet age and for kids these days, it's quite destructive. At a certain point, it's some weird, obscure niche thing, right? With missing limbs and
so weird fetishes and and so, paraphilias have kind of
exactly
are much more common than they were ever before. Kind of
exactly. Yeah. So there's this ratcheting, and that's what certain people need. I think in in sports viewing, it used to be like you would cheer for your team and you would hang out with your friends and cheer for your team. And now, I interview people, each of those people were part of like a group of friends. So there was like sort of 30-ish friends in the various interviews I did. And the vast majority of the 30 are all gambling, and they need that. The ratcheting is like, you used to watch it with your friends and hang out and cheer for your team. Now you watch like the random Minnesota Twins, Kansas City Royals game because you all have action on it. And then it becomes impossible to enjoy anything without that action. And I think the difference, like porn addiction and porn in general, is it's terrible. I I go through been through long moratoriums from porn, and I think it is quite just bad. But you're not going to descend into financial ruin over a few long weekends watching porn, and that's why this is such a unique and frightening addiction and experience. So, I think but you combine it and you're watching porn and then you're sports betting, you're watching porn, and, you do the parlay with the two of them, and it's,
right. Can you bet on porn? That would be a good thing. Like, how long would it take this climax to occur? Maybe something like that. I got a lot of ideas.
That would be great. We should go, pitch this to some venture capitalists.
Okay. But I mean, are there, I imagine that a lot of these guys who are addicted to the sports betting are also watching a lot of porn. I mean, these would be layers of trouble.
It's the ubiquity. At any point, if you're bored, you can, just go to Pornhub and have an experience, right? And it's the same for betting. I mean, people talk about it all the time, doing it in bed, waking up in the middle of the night, you can't sleep. You're having an experience with an addictive product, which is your phone. Like, the phone is what is the first order addiction. And then you have these second order addictions, like porn, which can destroy your, ability to be a healthy sexual being. And then you have sports gambling, which can destroy your marriage, destroy your relationships. And, it has the highest rate of suicide out of any addiction.
Sports betting does?
Gambling in general, gambling addiction. So it's not aggregate the highest, but the percentage. And it's just because like people do like Harry, our guest, like got disbarred. He got sentenced to multiple felonies. Like, when you're dealing with money and you're dealing with like, it's a different sort of thing.
I'm sure, because I mean, the sort of cognitive profile of somebody who is a gambler, that's also somebody who's going to do very well in business. Potentially, and there's all kinds of huge upsides to having that kind of impulse, right?
Correct.
To take risks.
Totally.
And so, I can see there's many dimensions to this. Well, one of the reasons that I wanted to talk with you about this on this show is that, beyond the nuts and bolts of this particular issue, there's all kinds of deeper social phenomena happening. It's the kind of stuff that we talk about a lot on the show, the masculinity crisis, what's happening with boys. I mean, presumably these are mostly boys and men doing this sports betting. I mean, maybe there's a whole girl boss contingent there.
It's hard to get the data, but it does seem like the vast majority is
they
boys.
could come up with a sort of like sports betting for girls. They could have like a pink. They should start to hold kind of like
that's another idea. Yeah.
Or they could bet on. I'm gonna get really sexy. They could bet on like ice skating, figure skating, or maybe that kind of thing. Like, do they have that? Like, is this person gonna land the triple sow cow?
100%. I mean, you have no idea. It's hard to imagine if you haven't been on these sites. You can bet on everything. And so the Olympics, figure skating, the Lutz or no Lutz.
Really? Like, are they going to fall off the balance beam kind of thing?
All of that stuff. Yeah. I mean, it's not, they like the apps know which ones are set them up for success. So it's not like every permutation of any sport is in their user experience, but it would shock you how many are.
Let's get to the boy crisis here.
Okay.
What are your thoughts about that?
On the boy crisis? I mean, I'm not an expert on the boy. I'm a boy.
You're a podcaster, so therefore you have to. This has to be your main focus.
I mean, I don't
required.
I listened when Richard Reeves did his 97 podcast tour.
Yes, including
whatever
on
that
this
was
show.
a few years ago. I listened to many of them.
Richard Reeves is the author of Boys and Men, and he has an initiative to get boys like achieving in school again and kind of re-entering society. And he's with the Brookings Institution and et cetera.
I think that I'm very sympathetic to much of what he says. I think the ways that boys and girls develop are quite different. And, my previous work, I was in education, and you can see the way the boys are falling behind academically across the board. And so I think, I do think that the reason sports betting, one of the reasons this was of interest to me is because it's I don't know how you would frame it. It just seems like another, it's not nail in the coffin, but it's another blow to half the population that isn't doing so hot. And it's just another sort of arrow in a young man's quiver to like kind of ruin his life. And it's not like, and we should be like not providing more arrows. We should try to minimize the arrows or make the arrows much less deadly. I think, and so I think that's true. I think like, again, in these groups that I interviewed and these like friend groups that in their 20s and 30s, the majority of them are engaged in some unhealthy relationship with this that either has or will have an impact on their lives and their marriages and their and like all of the relationships. And I think so to me, like it's hard to be a good husband. It's hard to be a good father. These things like require time, they require energy. You have your job. Like the one thing across all three of them, all three of them were married, had kids, was how they were being delinquent in those jobs because of the sports betting, because of the time it took to do the research, because of the stress of managing their like 7 bank accounts. Like, so I think in general, like we should be, as men, as boys, we should be setting ourselves up to be as successful as we can. And I think this is something that is uniquely setting us up for failure. And I think the thing that's interesting about it is I haven't had addiction issues, and I've never been particularly concerned about like, hey, I'm trying a drug and I'm like scared to be addicted. It's never seemed like that would be an issue. But with this, I am incredibly nervous about it. Like having it on my phone, like I'm going to delete it after this podcast. Like I've felt that rush. I haven't felt the full whatever crazy orgasm, but I felt like the rush of winning, of the action, of like all of that. And it's scary. I think a lot of people that might not be susceptible, and there's not good data, I've like looked for this, that might not be susceptible to other forms of addiction are susceptible to something like gambling. Yeah, I mean, this is something I want to explore more, but I feel it. I feel it in myself. Just the idea of winning a few times and thinking that I have some edge, and then you got to dig yourself out of the hole, right? That's the whole thing. Then you get in a hole, you got to dig yourself out via it, and then you have the new credit line, and you got the new. So I think. I think that the thing about this is this could be a bipartisan issue. Like, you know what I mean? This doesn't feel, it's like one of the few things that doesn't feel super MAGA or
They'll find a way. Don't
They
worry.
will. I'm sure. I mean, Trump is a casino guy, so I'm sure he's not gonna he's not gonna be the best. But it does feel like such a weird moment because it's like picture we were in whatever the early 2000s and we knew the Sacklers were doing what they're doing, right? It's like, oh, hey, there's a Sackler. There's a Sackler. They're very clearly doing what they're doing and we all knew it. And yet there's an entire media landscape that is saying nothing. Like we're looking at it. Jason Robbins, the CEO of DraftKings, is going to be played by Glenn Powell in whatever the Netflix series is in 5 years when this blows up. And the suicide rate of young boys skyrockets. And it just feels like we're watching it and we should be doing something, even just if only like implementing some of the regulations that Harry and Congressman Tonko and Senator Blumenthal proposed recently. So, they recently put out the SAFE Act, and it just has some common sense regulations. Like I said, I'm still probably a prohibitionist, which we don't have to get into, but I think like at the very least, we should be aggressively regulating it and everyone could get on board.
By way of wrapping this up, I mean, I wonder what you think more broadly of just the way we are addicted to our phones. I mean, it's such a cliche. It's such an obvious question, but right. I mean, especially for those of us who remember the before times and we see how addicted, even we are. I mean, I was just reading something. I mean, this was actually fascinating. There was a piece in the New York Times the other day about how people are sad about not being grandparents, like, these boomers, because their right. millennials aren't having kids. And I know this is another subject that you took on the disagreement, whether or not to have kids. Yeah. And in the comments, there were several comments saying that my aging parents wouldn't, they don't really feel like grandparent material, frankly, because they're looking at their phones all the time.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Like senior citizens are addicted to their phones. And I have heard this from other people.
Yeah.
And it's pretty striking.
Yeah. I'm like I'm highly radicalized around this. And what's funny is like, prior to starting the Disagreement, 7 months ago, I had taken some time off and I really minimized my phone use, like really was off all social media. And because of this work and, trying to get the show off the ground and market it, like I am addicted. Like I had a realization like a week ago where it was like, I couldn't fall asleep without like checking Instagram for like 10 minutes to like unwind. And at the same time, it made me feel unwell. It was this weird, and that's what addiction is. It was like, I both needed to do it. And yet not even just like my own self, like disgust or any of that, like actually just my eyes on the screen, like so I am personally in a state where I have the least healthy relationship with my phone. And it's pathetic. Like I'm going into the woods in a week and a half for 5 days to reset, like not bringing the phone. Like I truly, this is like, it's both deeply personal and yet I think I am someone who is like ideologically opposed to phones and like fairly disciplined in most areas of my life. So I don't, I think they are horrific. And I don't know. You're right. It's a cliche. We all talk about it, but I don't know.
I feel like there's no going back. I mean, it's really, and I never considered myself, I'm a very late adopter. Like I always say, I had a BlackBerry phone until like 2013 or something. Like I'm really slow. But yeah, I get super just addicted to like YouTube or, I go through phases where I'm just watching way too much of that stuff.
You're a literary figure. Like, do you read long books? Do you like, I can't.
On planes, I read them on airplane. Like I do not, unless I really have to do some kind of work thing that I need the internet. I don't do the internet when I'm on an airplane. and I travel pretty frequently. So that's kind of but
That's
part of it,
hack.
I have to say, I'm embarrassed.
Yeah.
It's like, because I know when I land, I know the second I land, I'm going to be able to turn my phone on and it's going to be so exciting.
I was out to eat last night by myself at a bar. And so, the first thing is I had my AirPods in and I'm like, that's rude. Like you're at a nice restaurant, you have your AirPods. So I was like, okay. So then I was like, all right, I'll scroll so I don't look lonely and
so
whatever.
You're going to be escorted out of the restaurant.
And then I was like, why do can I just have a meal? Can I literally be alone with my thoughts for like one meal? And the answer was I couldn't. Like I kept coming back. I tried. I did like 7 minutes, but I was like, oh, I got to write something down. It's like, oh, that thought. And then I had it. And then I was like, oh, well, that thing popped up. So I don't know. I'm trying to reset.
But what happened? Like I used to love to eat at the bar by myself, reading a book or a magazine. And then somebody would talk to you. They go, oh, you'd read the New Yorker.
Right.
And they'd be like, oh, did you read that article? And no more. My prediction is always like, not having this technology in your life is going to be like a status flex. It's going to be for the elites. Like if you have the privilege of being off of this stuff, that's going to be a sort of way of being cool. But there's going to be a whole lot of people who don't have that privilege.
Yeah, I think that's right. I am hopefully going to be a status flexer.
Well, Alex, this has been a great conversation. I feel like we've merely touched the surface, but tell us where we can find you, where we can find this particular episode, but just anything we need to know about you in general.
Yeah. So Alex Grodd at Alex Grodd on Twitter. The Disagreement, thedisagreement.com. We're on Substack. Check us out. It's a very different kind of podcast. It's real disagreement between two experts. On Instagram, the Disagreement HQ. And thank you. Thank you so much. This was super fun.
Oh, no, it was great. And I'm a big fan of the podcast. I like it that it's a disagreement and not a debate, because I'm tired of debates.
It's not a debate. It's like debate adjacent, but it's really meant to be two people like working through an issue in a collaborative way. Thanks so much, Meghan.
Well, thank you, Alex. You've been listening to the Unspeakable Podcast. To support the podcast, go to meghandaum.substack.com or theunspeakablepodcast.com and become a paying subscriber. That gets you access to all of the episodes in their entirety, as well as to my writing and lots of other perks. You can also check out The Unspeakeasy, my free speech women's community, at theunspeakeasy.com. We have in-person retreats all over the United States, a membership-based online community, and also some stuff that includes guys, like courses and occasional co-ed retreats. And by the way, we often have guest speakers that have been guests on this very podcast. So check that out at theunspeakeasy.com. I will be back next week with another super nuanced guest. Thanks for joining me. See you then.